Holiday tips and fun facts from Paul, Kristen, and Dexter at Total Wine & More.
Did you know there are over 1 million bubbles in a glass of champagne? Here's to a whole lot of celebrating.
I recommend pairing sweet foods with even sweeter tasting wines. This Thanksgiving, enjoy pumpkin pie with a delicious Moscato.
We have aisle upon aisle of party-perfect wines that are in your budget and out of this world. And I know where to find them all.
Whether you're entertaining or bringing the wine, Total Wine & More has you covered with 8,000 wines, 3,000 spirits, and 2,500 beers at always low prices. Cheers.
TCL is a proud sponsor of the 1500 ESPN studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. Minnesota Vikings, the NFL. Football, yeah, football. Welcome to Purple Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Purple Podcast. Matthew Coller here, and joining me, fans of the podcast will know the name, Brandon Thorn, our offensive line analyst, works for the Scouting Academy and writes for USA Football, has done a number of great breakdowns that you can see on his Twitter at Veteran Scout. Brandon, what's going on?
Not too much, Matt. Just excited to start talking about the Vikings and their upcoming opponent and just everything that's going on with the team.
All right, so we've looked at all sorts of different things when we've had you on, and at the top of the list of intrigue for Vikings fans is their rookie right tackle, Brian O'Neill. And there was a stat on Twitter about the number of sacks he has allowed so far this season, which is 0. And I think, Brandon, that before we schedule his Hall of Fame ceremony in Canton, we can say that he has been an upgrade over Rashad Hill, who had allowed 5 sacks in the time that he was in, but that there is still plenty to work on. So tell me what you have seen so far from Brian O'Neill and what progress he's made.
Yeah, so a lot of the same things that we saw and talked about him coming out of college, you see on the field. And I think the positives start with his athleticism and how quickly he's able to recover in pass protection, which I think is a big part of him not giving up sacks, because he does get beat a lot, initially at least, but he's able to recover so quickly and just run guys past the pocket or recover to the inside and push them, just down the line of scrimmage. And it, I think, hides the fact that he is getting beat, at least initially quite a bit. And I think, handling power, anchoring, those two things are still a struggle for him. You even saw it against Green Bay last week, who doesn't really have a good pass rusher on the outside. But guys like, Clay Matthews still, he can generate some speed to power. He blew up O'Neill a couple times, beat him to the inside a couple times. But Kirk Cousins was either able to get it off quick enough to not, see any pressure necessarily, or he was able to just kind of extend the play and maneuver around it. So those type of things, kind of go unseen, in the statistic, like you just mentioned. They don't get, mentioned, obviously. And it's just, that stat and who he is in a group with their 2 elite players is just very misleading. Obviously, he's nowhere near elite right now, but he definitely has, I think, that foundation that you like to see from a guy who is, relatively inexperienced in general, coming out of college, former tight end, still learning the position, but he's, and again, the first thing that impressed me when he started playing this year was his mental processing and his ability to recognize stunts and things like that. And, just block the right guy. I see things well in the field. So between that and his athleticism, I think you have something there, but there's still a lot of room for improvement based on what I've seen on the film.
So, of course, it's been an upgrade over Hill, who is a backup, and I have a lot of respect for, and what he's done to make a career for himself after in 2016 being on the Jacksonville practice squad. To be starting games and to be a reliable player is a huge thing to be said for Rashad Hill, but not a starter I don't think that you want for 16 games. So from that standpoint, they kind of had to go with O'Neill once they saw that he could play a little bit. But from his progress standpoint, from the development of Brian O'Neill, as a guy who has a chance with his athleticism to be a very good tackle, maybe even move over to left tackle at some point, do you think that this was the right move to throw him into the Wolves?
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely do. I think the things that he struggles with, the Vikings are doing a nice job of masking, due to, really a lot of help. The tight ends, tight ends, running backs, they're often lined up to his side in different alignments to help him out. Slide protection is often coming to his side. So they're doing, they clearly are, favoring help and gearing help towards his side, which is smart. And that's exactly how you want to develop somebody like this. You don't want to just do the opposite of everything I just said and put all the help and everything else to the left tackle. Obviously, you have somebody over there in Riley Reif who you can depend on to a certain extent to handle a lot of things, himself. So I like the way that they're, helping hide some of his deficiencies, showing his strengths in certain ways. So yeah, I definitely think it was the right choice, especially because of the way that they're handling it. So yeah, I'm all for him playing, the rest of the season and the decision that they've made. And, he's had a favorable schedule for the most part, and he does for the rest of the year as well. He's going to see Cam Wake, later in the year, and maybe Khalil Mack if they don't play him over the left tackle like they did. But yeah, so, for the most part, a pretty favorable schedule for offensive tackles, aside from a couple guys that you've seen like Cam Jordan and, Khalil Mack. So all those things considered, I think he's in a really good situation right now to develop.
So the offensive line as a whole has had some issues, clearly. And at the guard positions, I just don't think that there's a whole lot they can do. But the decision to have Mike Remmers move to guard, I think, has turned out to be disastrous. And I feel bad for Mike Remmers because of this. I think he should have been the tackle. It's nice that Brian O'Neill has done what he's done and been able to step in and show he could play, but ideally, maybe you wouldn't have wanted him to have that pressure on a team that wants to win the Super Bowl playing right tackle. And with Remmers at guard, it has looked to me, Brandon, like below replacement level guy. Like you could pretty much bring in anyone off the street and they'd play as well. And that's not what Mike Remmers is. I mean, I think he's an average right tackle, but a well below average right guard. And it's been a tough spot. And when I watch him on tape, he's battling like hell. I just don't think it's his job.
Yeah. The guard transition for him, I think we both kind of foresaw it not going so well, even though he did look good last year in that one start. He's just not really, his skill set isn't a guard. He played his whole career at tackle in Carolina and, when he first came to Minnesota. So he really struggles. And on top of that is the competition. I mentioned on the outside for the tackles, it hasn't been that, that tough. But on the inside, it's a whole different ballgame. The interior defensive line in the NFL, virtually every week, you're going to see, at least one very good elite player, if not even two sometimes. So, those two things put together, him just not really being cut out for the inside and having to learn a new position this season on top of facing outstanding competition, it's been really, really tough for him. And, he's just one of those guys at this point. I think he's definitely somebody, the Vikings have to replace in the offseason. And I'm not sure if they can really do much, to hide him or to overcome him as the season progresses. And especially when you get to the playoffs and you're starting to see, virtually almost every interior defensive line you're going to see is going to be very good. So, it's just one of those things where you just have to, just kind of hope that he can improve to a level where you can win with him as opposed to win in spite of him. And I think he's more so in that former category right now.
And, the Vikings didn't make some good choices against Akeem Hicks and left Remmers one-on-one at times with him to just get blown up. And then even we saw that last week too, where, the interior defensive linemen in the NFC are just monsters, and you can't have Kenny Clark against Remmers, and you can't have Akeem Hicks against Remmers. These guys are just too good, and we've seen them completely take advantage of him. And I also think that it speaks to a little bit of like what Pat Elflein has faced in his first two seasons in the NFL. Just as a rookie coming in last year, he has to face this murderer's row, and then again this year he comes back from injury and faces Aaron Donald, Fletcher Cox, and Akeem Hicks a few weeks later. They're like the top three, and then Clark as well. These are top five type of guys, and I don't know what solution there is to it, Brandon, other than there really isn't. You can't really paint over a guard when they have to match up on a lot of these run plays. It's basically the Vikings just have to find ways to run to the outsides.
Yeah, you can't really do much, especially when guys are lining up in like the 3 technique spot. I mean, you can't really help out the guard a whole lot. You could do little things here and there where you send a running back. If he's going to release into a route, you can release him actually through your B gap and, chip a defensive tackle. I've seen teams do that, but, you want to obviously bring the center over to his side so he really has that inside help as much as you can, which they've been doing. They slide to the right a lot to help not only O'Neal, but also Remmers, I think, to have that inside help from the guard and center. So I think that those are 2 things that you could do, but you obviously can't do that the majority of the time or anything. So there's really not a whole lot you can do because the competition is so stiff and, it's not really letting up a whole lot as I'm looking at their schedule, maybe a little bit, against Miami and Detroit, but Seattle has, Deron Reed, who's a pretty good player. New England, we'll talk about, has a couple of, pretty good defensive tackles. So, for the most part, almost every team on the schedule, it's not going to offer any let up there on as far as competition. So it's tough. But this is a position that a lot of teams in the league are in, where their interior offensive line just, they have one player that just can't match up. So.
Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience this football season. Tons of TVs, legendary appetizers, amazing fresh half-pound burgers, handcrafted sandwiches, and a wide variety of other pub favorites. The drink menu is awesome, too. Huge selection of tap beer, handcrafted cocktails, and the best Bloody Marys in town. Seriously, these Bloodies are awesome. Try the Bacon Bloody, the Jalapeno Bloody, the Mother Mary, or just get a flight and try them all. Plus, Lucky's 13 celebrates Sunday Fun Day. Happy hour all day long on Sunday, every Sunday. Events and prize giveaways during games, too. Lucky's 13 has locations in Bloomington, Burnsville, Mendota, Plymouth, and Roseville. Having people over for the game? Call ahead to Lucky's and order some of those legendary apps, and they'll be ready to bring home when you get there. It's football time at Lucky's 13 Pubs. Find them online at luckys13pub.com. luckys13pub.com. It's the most wonderful time of the year, football time. And Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience. luckys13pub.com.
So with Elflein, last week I thought he was used to his strength finally, and he was on the move, and he was blocking for Delvin Cook in space. And imagine that. I mean, it's something we've talked about with him since he was in Ohio State, and you liked him in the draft. I mean, it's just like, to me, it was a failure of the Vikings offense since they got him back to not fully utilize his skill. And this is when I see, the NBC broadcast runs the Pro Football Focus ranks, which I think is cool. And like the more stats and information you can bring to fans is great. But when it says that he's rated as one of the worst centers, I think, well, he's got a backup left guard. He's got a guy in right guard who can't play that position. So he's got not much help there. And then he's got an offensive coordinator who's totally deviated from what Pat Shurmur's scheme was, where they ran outside zone. They don't do that now. From what I've seen, I can't think of 3 times where they've run just straight up outside zone runs, and that's where I think Elflein's great at reaching a guy that's off of his left or right shoulder, and he hasn't been allowed to do that. Another thing, I don't mean to rant, Brandon, but against the Keem Hicks, there's a play where they asked Elflein against this monster to reach block him and turn him. Like, that's not, come on. Like, of course your Pro Football Focus grade's going to be terrible when you're asking someone to, he's lined up over Elflein's right shoulder. You're asking him to reach Hicks's right shoulder and then turn Hicks to run through that gap. That's just not going to happen. Like, I don't know who you think that he is, but he's not Dermontti Dawson. He's a good player. So finally, I feel like they are using him in the right way to get him out in space and block on those screens. And that's where we're going to see Elflein do his best work.
Yeah, definitely. So, Elflein's not the biggest guy. He's barely 300 pounds. Excuse me. So when you're asking him to block any of these, monsters on the inside at nose tackle, even Eddie Goldman on top of Akeem Hicks, that's just really not his game. His game is what you've mentioned, the zone run game, the screen game, pulling, those are the things that he showed on tape in college where he excelled at the most. And that's really what he does the best in the NFL as well. So I totally agree that, I would like to see more of him in space. And we did see, that really nice Dalvin Cook swing pass where Elflein released and just took a great angle out to the linebacker and just got enough for him to spring Cook. Those are the type of things that he's done several times over the course of this season and even more so last season. So yeah, I hope that they continue to trend in that direction because again, it also helps O'Neal in that sense as well. If you could I'd love to see some pin pull. I know I mentioned this last time we talked too, but some pin pull would be great where you have a tight end down blocking outside of O'Neal and then Remmers down blocking outside of Elflein and let both those two pull and get out in space. Mm-hmm. I would love to see some of that. But yeah, hopefully that's something that gets built into the game plan more as the season progresses because that's really what's going to allow Elflein to shine and really take advantage of his strengths.
In some ways, I feel like it can be not fair entirely to John DeFilippo, who is in his first year with some of these players, but in another way, it's like you've got to be able to maximize the strengths, not just of your running back, not just of your quarterback, but of your offensive line too, if you're going to succeed. And I think that there's plenty to grow there with Elflein's usage and with O'Neal's, and the other guys are just hang on for dear life. I think Arif has had a couple really tough games, but overall, he's been okay, I think. That he's sort of been who we think he is. When you face Khalil Mack, your numbers are gonna be bad, and you're not gonna look good because he's like one of the 3 best players in the NFL that isn't a quarterback. So I mean, it's just I think it's not gonna be a good night for you.
Yeah, Reef is a solid tackle, but when you have a solid player going against an elite player, things are gonna happen like we saw in that matchup. I mean, it's not. After that, it's not like I'm saying Reef sucks, or anything like that, like a lot of people probably, may do. But yeah, it's just, he's a solid player. And when you go against elite guys, you're going to struggle, especially if you're trying to block them one-on-one and stuff. So yeah, it's, nothing too crazy. I think overall this season, he's been solid. You don't want to see even solid players get beat to the extent that he did in that game. But I mean, it's Khalil Mack. And like you said, he's definitely elite, but I agree. He's probably one of the 2 or 3, 4 best non-quarterback players in the league. So, and I don't know how much they were expecting him to be over Reef as much as they were in that game either, which may have threw a little bit of a wrench in the blocking scheme and stuff like that. But yeah, so that was kind of unexpected as well. So, but yeah, it's, I think Reef's been solid for sure.
Let's go over to the defensive side of things here, Brandon, and talk a little bit about this unbelievable defensive line, which we knew would be very good. But and this is why you continually appear on this podcast, because in the offseason, it was like, okay, how good is Sheldon Richardson now? Like, he was very good before, but there was some off-field stuff, and is he still that type of guy? Can confirm he's still that type of guy. He has been a monster. One of the, I think, 10 best at the 3-technique position in the NFL. He's been dominant against the run. They're one of the best run defenses in the league. It helps Linval Joseph. He's in the backfield all the time. Guards cannot handle him one-on-one. His quickness tracking people down. Like, this guy has been an incredibly good signing for the Vikings. And when they're healthy and when they've got Everson Griffin and then Richardson playing like this, they've got a very good case for the best defensive line in the NFL.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Their defensive line is not only are the starters elite, but the depth is elite as well. Now at this point with Everson Griffin back, I mean, the fact that you guys have Weatherly and Tom Johnson as rotational guys is just crazy. And then even Jaleel Johnson's getting some snaps. So I love the defensive line as a whole, and I definitely think they're the best in the league right now. If you factor in, not just 1 through 4, or, if the teams run, 3 men front, whatever, not just the starters, but also if you look at the whole unit. So yeah, their defensive line is just absurd because even when guys, take a breather, you have a good player coming in his place most of the time. So yeah. And with Sheldon Richardson, I mean, last year, like, I was trying to, tell people that I went into last year when I studied him, like never studying him before. I always heard things like, yeah, he was awesome before he had some off the field stuff or whatever, and he kind of trended down. But I went into the tape last year on him just totally kind of blind to ever studying him, and I was blown away. I had him top 7 defensive tackle above guys like DeForest Buckner, Sue, other players. And I think the situation that he's in now has really allowed that to even go to another level in terms of production, because of he's on a much better defensive line this year than he was last year. I mean, he's on the best defensive line in the league, seeing a lot less attention, to his side and things like that. I mean, you can't ever really bring more attention to him because he has Danielle Hunter or Everson Griffin right outside of him, and then Linval inside of him. So he's surrounded by great players, and it's really allowed him to kind of even go to another level, which I thought he was already a very good to elite guy last year. But he's a great athlete. He has really good quickness off the line of scrimmage. He has good power. And I think more than anything, he plays really hard. The speed, I think you see a lot on like the backside of runs, which is awesome to see. But him as a pass rusher, what makes him so good, in my opinion, is his pass rush plan. He always has a plan. If his first move doesn't work, he has a variety of counters to go to. And whenever you have that against an interior offensive lineman 1-versus-1, you're going to win the majority of reps. And he's a lot of fun to watch this year. I'm really glad that he got into the Mike Zimmer system. And, because I know the 3 technique is a very important position in that defense. So, and he's with the great defensive line coach, Andre Patterson, as well. So he's in just a great position. He's taking advantage of it. So yeah, their defensive line, man, right now is just absolutely stacked. And it's what it's doing for the defense, allowing the defense to play more guys in coverage is also extremely beneficial. So they don't really have to blitz much to get after the quarterback.
So do you think that they should sign Richardson to a long-term contract?
Oh, I mean, I don't see why not, at this point. I mean, if he's, from what I've heard and everything, he's taken to the environment in Minnesota. He appreciates the way that things are run there, which, I think most defensive players do once they get into, a Mike Zimmer system. So yeah, I say, by all means at this point, as long as, even the contract though, you may have to give him what appears initially to be just an ungodly amount of money at this point. Mm-hmm. But, how the contracts work after a couple of years, it might be, he might turn into a bargain, or even just a really good contract. But initially you may have to, eclipse maybe every defensive tackle in the league aside from Aaron Donald. I don't know what that would look like, but it's in terms of the player, I think, you want this guy in that system long term for sure.
Now, Danielle Hunter, they got one of the biggest steals ever of my life that I've ever seen when it comes to a contract, considering what defensive ends deserve to get paid in the NFL today. And what Hunter signed for was pennies on the dollar. But you know what? He can still afford to buy a couple helicopters, so I don't feel bad for Danielle Hunter. He's doing fine. He has become one of the best defensive ends in the NFL. And I think we looked at him as a situational guy who got a bunch of sacks. That's great. A lot of potential there 2 years ago. Then last year, as a starter, pretty good. Ups and downs. Took him a little while to kind of get his sea legs there. And now, complete freak show. Tell me what you see for the progress of Danielle Hunter.
Yeah, his progress in terms of just the whole NFL landscape, I think, is as impressive, if not more impressive, than any other player in the league. Because coming out of LSU, he was just a physical freak who was very raw. But whatever Mike Zimmer and Andre Patterson saw, they were right. And their ability to develop guys, establish, primary move, additional moves to his repertoire as a pass rusher, just everything, the leverage he's playing with. He's really, really taking advantage of his physical tools, and his physical tools are truly freaky. So to be able to put in, sound fundamentals and make a guy technically proficient with what he is physically is just, we're seeing the manifestation of that, and he's becoming an elite player really quickly, and he's still really, really young, which is, just crazy. So yeah, as a pass rusher, I think his length and his athleticism just gives guys a lot of problems. The way he uses his hands now as a pass rusher, he looks extremely refined. He just, it's night and day from when he was a rookie to at this point in his career. I just think really what he does with his hands as a pass rusher is pretty special. The way he gets, uses the forklift technique quite a bit. So with that, an offensive lineman get their hands on his chest. He does a really nice job of just using these subtle pushes and pulls and slaps and things just to get hands off of him so he can continue moving up the arc and, stab and get around the corner. He can also counter inside. He has the power to just go straight down the middle of a guy. So really he can beat you outside in or straight down the middle. So that really makes it tough for offensive tackles to establish their game plan against him because he can just do everything. And he's also a very good run defender. So he's just, he's outstanding.
His trajectory that is incredible. And I think something that I come to just a conclusion about players and getting better is that's what it's really all about. I mean, there's a lot of freaks. There's not a lot of Danielle Hunter freaks, but there are a lot of really great athletes who play, and it's all about, can you continue to get better and better and better through your prime and through that first contract? And if you can, you're going to stick for a long time. And if you already have the raw talent, you could be an elite player if you just keep working at it and keep finding ways to progress. And that's what he's done.
And if you have great coaching.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Which is huge. And
Andre Patterson is like the MVP of the team every year, it seems, with the way that the defensive line praises him. It really is. And you know what? They never miss an opportunity either. And that's where, as a professional reader of between the lines commentary from football players, which is how I feel sometimes because they only play 16 games. So the rest of the time I'm trying to figure out what they're talking about. And the fact that every defensive lineman in almost every press conference will say something about Andre Patterson, it tells you how they feel about him. It tells you what the value is there because they don't have to do that. They do that so everyone knows, because otherwise,
which is very cool.
Right. So, let me just ask you last thing, Brandon, and of course, it's just awesome as always. And I can't wait, by the way, to the offseason where we start breaking down offensive linemen to draft this time, and then maybe they'll actually draft one of them we talk about, as opposed to last year where they didn't.
I think they will.
I am very confident, but I was very confident in first rounder last year, and that didn't happen. So anyway, digress to the New England Patriots, what they got coming up this week. Not a team that has any sort of 10-sack type of guy. You're not going to see Lawrence Taylor coming out and playing for Bill Belichick's New England Patriots, but some solid guys. So what should we look for this week, and how do you expect this matchup to go between the Patriots defensive line and the Vikings offensive line?
Yeah, so I think you summed it up pretty well there in terms of what the Patriots are offering on their defensive line. They rotate their guys quite a bit. Trey Flowers is the key piece on that defensive line. He's the best player. He's predominantly an outside pass rusher, but he's been playing, inside quite a bit in their 3-man defensive front. But in passing situations, he slides outside to end. He gives a lot of problems to guards though. Whenever he's rushing over them, he's a big problem for guards. So that could spell some trouble for you guys for sure. He's very quick. He has good length, underrated strength, I think. And he has a spin move. He has a couple different moves that he can throw at guys on the inside. From the outside, I don't think he's quite as effective from what I've seen, but he's still a guy that can give some tackles some trouble as well. But he's kind of their chess piece type of guy that they move in, multiple alignments and, the best defensive lineman on the team, I think for sure. But then outside of that, you have a couple, solid interior defensive linemen. You got to start with Malcolm Brown, who has been, solid, if not, he's definitely a good run defender. He just doesn't offer a whole lot as a pass rusher aside from just kind of pushing the pocket. But he's definitely a very good run defender, I think. And another guy, Adam Butler, I'll talk about him a little bit. He's a guy I watched as well last year. But Adam Butler is their basically their nickel dime defensive tackle who comes in on passing downs. He's just kind of a quick guy and gives guys some trouble on the interior. Him and Flowers are kind of their primary pass rushing guys on passing downs, nickel and dime sets or defensive fronts. Adrian Claiborne rotates in as well. He has a really nice cross chop move off the edge that can give some offensive tackles some trouble, as well as good power, but not much else outside of that. Pretty good run defender. Lawrence Guy is another guy on the interior, very strong, long arms, hard to move. So they have a couple of those guys. Danny Shelton also, is another guy who's a good run defender. So several good run defenders on the interior. It's tough to do a lot against them. I think their linebackers, are the part of the reason why maybe the run defense isn't better than it is, because they do have good individual players, I think, on the defensive line in terms of run defenders. But pass rushers, they don't have a lot there in terms, especially on the outside, aside from Trey Flowers. There's just, they have John Simon, who's kind of just a hustle guy who, is a good run defender who can get some cleanup sacks, but he's not scaring offensive tackles, I don't think, very much. It's really, and Claiborne, like I said, what he does well. So Flowers is kind of the guy, I think that you have to worry about as a pass protector. And aside from that, it's just a bunch of big, strong guys in the middle who are tough to move.
Would you categorize them as being sort of sneaky good, like they don't get talked about a lot, or not should really scare you at all?
I don't think they should really scare you that much aside from Trey Flowers.
The disrespect.
Their running defense, I think is really what you kind of.
Brandon, I love how you just move right past that. Like I'm just I'm making a stupid comment, and you're just like, go. You know what? I'm going right back to football. You can say whatever you want. Okay, carry on.
No, I just kind of wanted to cap that and just say the best thing they do, I think, individually on the defensive line is they have some good run defenders and then a good pass rusher in Trey Flowers. So. There's much scarier defensive lines out there, I'll say that.
Well, I think that the Vikings running up the middle is pretty much not a thing that they can do anyway. So when it comes to having interior, I think that Mike Zimmer is just asking John DeFilippo or maybe begging him to just not try to pound it up the middle anymore, because when they pounded it up the middle on 3rd and 1 against Akeem Hicks, it was like, okay, this experiment has to end where they're just going to try and force runs up the middle, and so I don't think they'll have much success.
Yeah, they don't have a dominant force like that either, of course. Because Hicks is a guy who plays behind the line of scrimmage, too. And they don't really have many of those guys on the interior. They just have kind of those guys who absorb blockers and just hold their position, which is valuable to an extent. Mm-hmm. But you guys like Hicks are just the power that they have. I don't really see that on the inside of the Patriots defensive line. So just that caveat I think is important.
All right. Well, Brandon, I'm not surprised at all by another stellar appearance here on the Purple Podcast. Always great. Incredibly detailed as always, especially the Danielle Hunter breakdown and Brian O'Neill. So just fantastic stuff. And people can follow you on Twitter. I think you do a lot of offensive line teaching on Twitter by just pointing out different things that people should look for with offensive, defensive line at Veteran Scout. Also, you write for USA Football, and awesome stuff. So make sure you check that out. And thank you, as always, for dropping by, Brandon.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me again.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of the Purple Podcast.
Holiday tips and fun facts from Paul, Kristen, and Dexter at Total Wine & More.
Did you know there are over 1 million bubbles in a glass of champagne? Here's to a whole lot of celebrating.
I recommend pairing sweet foods with even sweeter tasting wines. This Thanksgiving, enjoy pumpkin pie with a delicious Moscato.
We have aisle upon aisle of party-perfect wines that are in your budget and out of this world. And I know where to find them all.
Whether you're entertaining or bringing the wine, Total Wine & More has you covered with 8,000 wines, 3,000 spirits, and 2,500 beers at always low prices. Cheers.
I'm Rita Foley with an AP News Minute. The Centers for Disease Control says too many of us are dying too early. There were more than 2.8 million deaths last year, about 70,000 more than the previous year.
47,000 suicides, the most in at least 50 years. 70,000 drug overdose deaths. The early deaths drove down life expectancy to 78 years, 7 months. It was close to 79 just 4 years ago. I'm Tim McGuire.
China is ordering a medical team that says it helped make the world's first gene-edited babies to stop its work. Leading scientists are slamming the work. Nobel laureate David Baltimore of the California Institute of Technology.
The procedure was irresponsible and failed to conform with international norms.
President Trump says pardoning his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, is not off the table. Manafort is caught up in the Russia investigation. I'm Rita Foley.